Hey everyone, welcome back to Botanic Haven, your go-to channel for all things gardening, plant care and creating beautiful green spaces both indoors and outdoors. Whether you're tending a tiny balcony garden or managing a full backyard oasis, this is the place where we talk about real plants, real problems and real solutions. Today's topic is one of my absolute favorites and honestly one of the most important conversations we can have this time of year. What successful gardeners actually do before spring arrives. Not during spring, before it. Because here's the thing. The gardeners who have the most stunning gardens in May and June are usually the ones who spent a few quiet afternoons in late winter, walking around their yard with a notebook, making observations and getting things sorted before the chaos of the growing season hits. I've been gardening for years now, and one of the biggest mindset shifts I ever made was realizing that spring success is mostly a winter project, when the ground is still cold and the beds look bare and a little sad. That's actually the perfect time to fix things. There's no pressure, no rush, no wilting plants screaming for attention. It's calm, it's quiet, and your decisions are clear-headed. I remember talking to a neighbor of mine, a lovely woman named Rose who's been growing vegetables and perennials for over 30 years, and she told me something I never forgot. She said, the garden rewards the people who show up before it asks them to. And she was absolutely right. So today we're going to walk through 10 things that successful gardeners check and fix before spring begins. These aren't complicated, expensive or time-consuming tasks. Most of them take an afternoon, a cup of tea and a good pair of gloves. But together they make an enormous difference in how your garden performs all season long. I want to hear from you as we go through this, by the way. Gardening is always better as a conversation. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments. And if not, write 0. This way I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Okay, let's get into it. The first thing every experienced gardener checks before spring is their soil. Not just a quick glance, but a real, honest assessment. Healthy soil is the foundation of everything. Your plants live or die based on what's happening underground. Grab a handful from different spots in your garden and really look at it. Is it dark and crumbly, or is it pale and compacted? Does it smell earthy and alive, or does it smell sour and stale? If your soil has been neglected or heavily rained on over winter, it may have compacted significantly, which means roots will struggle to push through and water won't drain properly. The fix is often as simple as working in some compost or aged manure before the season starts. My friend Lucas, who grows some of the most jaw-dropping tomatoes I've ever seen, tests his soil every single February. He's obsessed with pH levels and nutrient balance, and you know what? His tomatoes never disappoint. He told me once that most people buy expensive fertilizers when what their plants actually need is better soil to begin with. Along with checking your soil structure, it's worth thinking about whether you've added any organic matter over the winter. If you've been composting, even a little bit, now is the time to spread that gold all over your beds. Compost does so much more than add nutrients. It improves drainage in clay-heavy soils, helps sandy soils retain moisture, feeds the microbial life that plants depend on, and slowly releases nutrients over the whole season. If you haven't made your own compost yet, please don't feel bad. Grab a few bags from your local garden centre and work it in before things start growing. Even a thin layer of 2 to 3 inches mixed into the top of your beds will make a noticeable difference by mid-spring. The second check is your drainage situation, and this one gets overlooked more often than you'd think. Walk around your garden after a rain or after snow melts and notice where water pools. If you have spots that stay soggy for days, those areas are going to cause problems. Plants that sit in waterlogged soil can develop root rot, fungal diseases, and general stress that makes them weak and vulnerable. I once watched a beautiful young gardener named Daisy lose an entire bed of dahlias because of a drainage issue she didn't know she had. The plants looked fine at first, but by July they were rotting from the roots up. The fix can be as simple as improving your soil with grit or compost, creating a slight slope to direct water away, or installing a simple French drain if the problem is serious. Before spring, when beds are empty and the soil is workable, is the best possible time to address this. The third thing to check is your tools. I know, this sounds boring, but hear me out. Dull, rusty, broken tools make gardening harder and less enjoyable than it needs to be. Before the season starts, pull out everything, your spades, forks, trowels, pruners, hose, and give them a proper inspection. Sharpen your pruners and spades with a sharpening stone or file. Clean off any rust with steel wool and a little oil. Check that handles aren't cracked or wobbly. Wipe everything down with an oiled rag to protect the metal over the season. It takes maybe an hour, and the difference it makes when you're working in the garden is remarkable. Sharp, clean tools cut cleanly through soil and stems, which is better for both you and your plants. A clean cut heals faster than a ragged one, and that matters more than most people realize. Fourth on the list, and this is a big one, is checking your raised beds and garden structures for any winter damage. Freeze-thaw cycles are brutal on wood. If you have wooden raised beds, planter boxes, trellises or borders, inspect every joint and board. Look for warping, splitting, rot and loose screws or nails. A bed that's starting to sag or fall apart needs to be fixed before you fill it with soil and plants, because doing it after is a nightmare. I helped my friend Oliver repair 2 raised beds one February, and we found that the corner posts had rotted almost completely at the base. If we hadn't caught it, those beds would have completely collapsed by summer, probably right on top of whatever he was growing in them. A few replacement boards, some wood screws, and maybe a coat of non-toxic wood sealant, and you're good for another few years. While you're outside inspecting structures, check number 5. Your fences, stakes and supports. Any stakes or canes left in the ground over winter may have weakened, especially if the ground froze and thawed multiple times. Bamboo canes can become brittle, metal stakes can rust at the base. Netting can tear. Check your pea netting, bean poles, tomato cages and any climbing supports. Replace anything that looks questionable. It's far better to discover a broken trellis now than to find out on the day your climbing roses or sweet peas are reaching for it. This check costs you almost nothing. Just a bit of time and maybe a small investment in a few new stakes or zip ties. The 6th check is your irrigation and watering setup. If you have any drip irrigation, soaker hoses, or even just a collection of garden hoses, give them a thorough once-over before the season starts. Hoses left out in freezing temperatures can crack internally. The outside looks fine, but the inside is damaged, and you won't know until you're standing there in May, with a hose spurting water in all directions except where you want it. Drip irrigation lines can get clogged with mineral deposits or debris over winter. Emitters can get blocked. Timers can lose their settings or develop battery issues. Set everything up, turn it on and watch it run for 10 minutes. Fix whatever isn't working now while you have time and patience, rather than in the middle of a July heat wave when your plants desperately need water. Check number 7 is something I feel passionately about: your compost setup. Look at your compost pile or bin honestly. Is it too dry? Too wet? Has it stopped breaking down over winter? A neglected compost pile can get compacted, overly acidic, or just go dormant. Before spring, turn it if you can, add some dry brown material if it's slimy and wet, or give it a splash of water and a handful of garden soil if it's dry and lifeless. Getting your compost active and healthy before the season means you'll have a steady supply of the good stuff throughout summer and fall. And if you don't have a compost set up yet, I genuinely encourage you to start one this year. Even a simple pile in the corner of your yard will start producing usable compost within 6 months, and your garden will thank you for it every single year going forward. The 8th check is about your seeds and plant inventory. Before you go out and buy a cartload of new seeds and plants, take stock of what you already have. Most seeds store well for 1 to 3 years if kept in a cool, dry place. Go through your seed packets and note what you have, what you need, and what might be too old to germinate reliably. Old seeds don't necessarily go bad. Do a simple germination test by placing 10 seeds on a damp paper towel, folding it up, and leaving it somewhere warm for a week. If fewer than 5 or 6 of them sprout, those seeds are probably past their prime and not worth planting an entire bed with. This simple test has saved me from a lot of frustration over the years. There's nothing more disheartening than carefully planting a whole row of seeds, waiting weeks and getting almost nothing because the seeds were 5 years old. Number 9 is about pest and disease prevention, and this is where many gardeners miss a golden opportunity. Before your plants emerge, you have a chance to break the cycles of pests and diseases that plagued you last year. If you had problems with slugs, aphids, powdery mildew, or root rot in previous seasons, those issues don't disappear over winter. They hide, waiting for conditions to improve. Walk your garden and look for slug eggs, which appear as small clusters of pale, translucent spheres just under the soil surface. Remove any dead plant debris that could harbour fungal spores. Check the undersides of any evergreen plants for overwintering aphid eggs. If you had issues with a specific disease last year, research whether you need to adjust your crop rotation or treat the soil before planting again. An ounce of prevention in late winter is worth a pound of cure in the middle of the growing season, and I cannot stress that enough. The 10th and final check might surprise you. It's about your plan. Or more specifically, whether you have one. Successful gardeners don't just wander out in spring and start planting wherever there's space. They've thought about what's going where, what needs full sun versus shade, what they grew last year and what needs to move. Even a rough sketch on a piece of paper, a few circles and squares representing your beds, can save you from making expensive or time-consuming mistakes. Think about what worked beautifully last year, what struggled and what you want to try for the first time. Think about height, colour, harvest timing, and companion planting. A little bit of planning now means less replanting, less wasted money on plants that don't work in a given spot, and a much more satisfying garden overall. Now I want to go a little deeper on a few of these checks because I think some of them deserve more attention than a single paragraph. Let's start with soil, because it really is the most important thing in your entire garden, and most people, even experienced gardeners, underestimate how much work goes into keeping soil truly healthy year after year. When I say healthy soil, I'm not just talking about adding compost once and calling it done. Soil health is an ongoing relationship. Think of it like feeding a living community, because that's exactly what it is. A single tablespoon of healthy garden soil contains more microorganisms than there are people on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, they're all down there working together to break down organic matter, fight off pathogens, and deliver nutrients directly to plant roots. When you compact your soil by walking on it repeatedly, or when you leave it bare and exposed to heavy rain all winter, you're disrupting that entire community. The organisms die or go dormant, the structure breaks down, and your plants suffer even if you can't see exactly why. One thing I started doing a few years ago that made a real difference is covering my empty beds with a light layer of straw or shredded leaves over winter. It's called mulching for overwintering, and the goal is to protect that living soil community from the worst of the freeze-thaw cycle. When I pull that mulch back in early spring, the soil underneath is noticeably darker, softer and more alive than beds that were left bare. Earthworms are active right at the surface, which is always a great sign. If you missed doing this last winter, add it to your list for next year. And in the meantime, work in some compost generously before your first spring planting to help the soil recover. Let's also go deeper on planning, because I find that a lot of gardeners skip this step, either because they feel it's unnecessary or because they find it overwhelming. But planning doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't require fancy software or graph paper or color-coded spreadsheets, although those things are wonderful if you enjoy them. At its simplest, planning just means sitting down with a hot drink and thinking honestly about what your garden needs this year. Start with what went wrong last year. Were there plants that never thrived no matter what you did? Maybe they were in the wrong location. Too much shade, too much competition, poor drainage. Were there areas that looked bare and uninspiring in late summer after the spring flowers had finished? That's a gap in your succession planting, which just means you need plants that peak at different times of year to keep the garden looking full and interesting all season. Were there vegetables that produced so abundantly you couldn't eat them all, while others barely produced anything? That's useful information for adjusting quantities this year. Rose, my neighbour I mentioned earlier, keeps a simple garden journal. It's just a cheap notebook she's been writing in for years, and every fall she spends an evening going through it, noting what worked, what failed, and what she wants to try. By February, when she's doing her pre-spring planning, she has years of observations to draw from. She knows which corner of her garden heats up fastest in spring because she's noted it multiple times. She knows which variety of courgette always produces better than the others in her specific conditions. She knows exactly when her last frost date tends to fall, based on 10 years of her own records, not just the general regional average. That kind of personal, location-specific knowledge is incredibly powerful, and you can only build it by writing things down. I also want to say a bit more about pest prevention because the window before spring is genuinely one of the most underused opportunities in the gardening calendar. Most people think about pests reactively. They see a problem and then try to fix it. But if you've ever dealt with a serious slug infestation or a heavy aphid attack, you know how quickly things can get out of hand once the growing season is in full swing. The key is to interrupt the cycle before it starts. One of the best things you can do right now is look for where pests are likely to be overwintering on your property. Slugs love cool, damp hiding places, under pots, beneath boards, in thick leaf litter along the base of walls. Clearing these areas out, or at least checking them regularly, dramatically reduces your slug population heading into spring. You can also apply a layer of sharp grit or horticultural sand around vulnerable plants before they emerge, which slugs find very difficult to cross. For aphids, the main strategy before spring is checking your fruit trees and roses for their overwintering eggs. These eggs are tiny, dark, shiny, and usually clustered along the stems and around buds. If you see them, a simple spray of diluted horticultural oil will smother them before they hatch. It sounds fiddly, but it takes 10 minutes and can prevent weeks of aphid trouble later on. Similarly, if you had fungal issues like powdery mildew or black spot on your roses last year, clear away every fallen leaf from around the base of the plant and either bin them or burn them. Don't compost diseased material. The spores can survive the composting process and reinfect your plants when you spread the compost. Starting the season with clean beds and clean plants gives your roses the best possible chance of staying healthy. Another thing worth mentioning before we wrap up is the value of simply walking your garden slowly and observantly right now. It sounds almost too simple, but the act of looking really carefully at everything in your garden in late winter reveals things you'd never notice in the middle of a busy growing season. You might notice a perennial that has spread much further than expected and is starting to crowd its neighbours. You might spot a young tree that has developed a crossing branch that will cause problems if left to grow. You might realise that a particular spot gets far more afternoon shade than you thought, because you've never paid attention to it when the garden is bare and the shadows are long. All of these observations are useful, and all of them are easier to act on now than later. Early spring is forgiving. Plants are just waking up, the soil is easy to work, and there's plenty of time to make adjustments before things really get going. I want to share one more story, because it really captures everything we've been talking about. I know a gardener named Lucas, yes, the tomato guy, who moved to a new house a few years ago with a completely neglected garden. The beds were full of weeds, the soil was hard and pale, half the raised bed timber was rotten, and there was a serious drainage problem in the far corner that had turned it into a mini swamp. Most people would have looked at that garden and felt completely overwhelmed. But Lucas did something smart. He spent the entire first winter just observing and making small fixes, one check at a time. He didn't try to transform the whole garden at once. He fixed the drainage first because he knew everything else depended on it. Then he worked compost into the beds. Then he repaired the raised beds. Then he made a plan for what to grow and where. By the time spring arrived, he hadn't planted a single thing yet, but his garden was ready. And when he did start planting, everything went in smoothly. The plants thrived, and by summer that garden was producing abundantly. His neighbours kept asking what his secret was. He always said the same thing: "I got ready before I started." That's really the whole message today. The most impactful thing you can do for your spring garden isn't buying more seeds or spending more money. It's slowing down, paying attention, and taking care of the basics before the season demands your attention. 10 checks, a few afternoons, and a willingness to notice and fix things before they become problems. That's the difference between a garden that struggles and a garden that thrives. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here at Botanic Haven. This channel exists because we all share a love for growing things, for green spaces, for the quiet satisfaction of watching a seed turn into a plant, turn into something beautiful and nourishing. If you have questions about any of these checks, drop them in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're already doing some of these things, tell me about your routine. I love hearing how different gardeners approach their pre-spring prep. See you in the next one, and until then, keep growing, keep observing, and get that garden ready before spring beats you to it.